You think the gods are gone, that Olympus fell with time. But look again, their shadows move across our screens, their symbols sewn into the fabric of our world. What if the myths never left? They just evolved. Chapter 1. Echoes of Olympus. The gods may be silent, but their stories still speak. There's a strange comfort in thinking the ancient world is behind us, that the age of gods and monsters, of oracles and omens, ended with the fall of marble temples and the closing of scrolls. But the truth is, Olympus never really fell. It changed form, it shifted shape, and like all great myths, it adapted quietly, elegantly, hiding in plain sight. Tonight I want to take you to the threshold where old myths meet the modern world. Not in the dusty pages of forgotten libraries, but in places you'd never expect: streaming platforms, video games, clothing brands, and music videos. Because, whether you've noticed or not, Greek mythology never left us. It just found new ways to whisper. When you think of Greek myth, you might picture Zeus hurling lightning from a cloud, or Athena in full armor, born from the mind of a god. You might recall tragic figures like Icarus, flying too close to the sun, or Medusa, cursed with a gaze that turns men to stone. But what if I told you, those same stories still echo in our lives today? Not as ancient teachings, but as plot lines in shows you binge, as symbols on the shirts we wear, as inspiration behind the music we stream late at night when the world feels heavy and the stars seem distant. There is something eternal about mythology, not because it's old, but because it's true in a way facts never are. Facts expire. They belong to time. But myths, they belong to us, to our fears, our desires, our hunger to understand who we are and why we're here. And few myths have endured quite like those of ancient Greece. Why? Because they offered more than stories. They gave us archetypes, the original blueprints for human behavior. The wise goddess, the jealous king, the trickster, the doomed lover, the fallen hero. These characters weren't just fictional. They were psychological. They lived in us, and they still do. That's why when you see a modern show with a powerful woman cursed for speaking her truth, you're seeing echo. When a man becomes so obsessed with his own reflection that it destroys him, you're watching Narcissus fall again. When the underworld calls to someone too curious, too brave, too lost, you're watching Persephone descend. These patterns repeat, over and over, not because we lack originality, but because certain stories feel inevitable. So how did we get here? How did tales once whispered by poets under starlit skies end up embedded in Fortnite skins and designer fashion? It didn't happen overnight. It happened gradually, quietly, like water carving stone. The 20th century rediscovered the gods in art and cinema, films like Clash of the Titans, operas like Orpheus, paintings filled with heroic nudity and divine tragedy. But in the 21st century, something changed. The gods stopped just being subjects of art and became part of the tools we use to tell our own stories. They became language, symbols, aesthetics, mood boards, Easter eggs. Zeus might not demand temples anymore, but he does trend on Twitter during the release of a new series. Medusa is no longer feared. She's rebranded as an icon of power and rebellion. And Hades, he's single quotes S. Well, he's hot now. Animated, charming, morally gray, the ultimate Tumblr crush. This shift matters, because it says more about us than about them. We're not just telling the old stories again. We're rewriting them. As our values evolve, so do our myths. In ancient Greece, women like Medusa were punished for being victims. Today, some storytellers see her differently, not as a monster, but a survivor. In ancient myth, Achilles was a warrior of brute strength. Now, he is remembered for his grief, his love, and the tender moments hidden between battles. This isn't erasure, it's evolution, because mythology was never static. It was always retold, always reinterpreted. And now, we are the myth. If you've ever cried watching a show where a flawed hero sacrifices everything, if you've ever felt drawn to a character torn between two worlds, if you've ever seen yourself in someone broken, cursed, beautiful, you've already walked the path of myth. Even if you didn't know the names, Greek mythology, then, isn't a relic. It's a mirror, held up to us from across millennia, showing how little we've truly changed. We still long for meaning. We still crave transformation. We still wrestle with fate and freedom, love and vengeance, birth and death. So as we begin this journey chapter by chapter, we're not just exploring where the myths came from. We're exploring where they went, and more importantly, what they become. In the chapters ahead, we'll descend into the digital underworld, where Hades lives in a battle royale game, We'll meet Athena wearing designer silk on a magazine cover. We'll hear Orpheus again, strumming chords on a Spotify playlist. And we'll ask, if the gods are still here, hidden in pixels and prose, what are they trying to tell us? But for now, rest in the idea that you are not separate from these stories. They belong to you. They live in you. And like all myths worth telling, they're only just beginning. Chapter 2. The Rise of Blood of Zeus. When the gods returned, they didn't come in thunder, but in pixels. When we imagine the return of the gods, we think of lightning across the sky, a crack in the earth, a temple rebuilt. But in 2020, the return arrived. On Netflix, no celestial trumpets, no prophecy, just a thumbnail, a title, Blood of Zeus, and a quiet storm that spread across streaming queues around the world. It was unexpected, an animated series styled like Japanese anime, rooted in Greek mythology, yet pulsing with modern sensibility. Old names, new voices, familiar stories, told not as sacred legend, but as action-packed, emotional, and profoundly human drama. And for many viewers, this wasn't just a show, it was a revelation. Blood of Zeus did something most adaptations fear. It dared to rewrite myth, not to erase it, but to engage with it on its own terms, and on ours. It introduced us to Hieron, a demigod not found in ancient texts, but born of their spirit. He is not Achilles, not Hercules, not Odysseus. He is new, and yet we recognize him immediately, because he walks the mythic path, the orphan with a hidden lineage, the reluctant hero, the child of gods and mortals, pulled between two worlds. Sound familiar? It should. It's the same story echoing from Moses to Harry Potter, from Luke Skywalker to Simba, because myth doesn't need to be exact, it just needs to be true. And Blood of Zeus feels true, even in its violence, even in its chaos, even when Zeus himself, charming, flawed, manipulative, is reduced to a father begging for forgiveness. This is not the golden, untouchable god of Homer. This is a broken man, desperate to fix the damage he's caused. And that hits different in a modern world. We no longer worship gods who stand above judgment. We're drawn to ones who bleed, who fail, who fall, don't receive it. One of the most striking things about Blood of Zeus isn't just what it tells us, but how it tells it. The animation is brutal and beautiful. The pacing, relentless. The tone, operatic, yet intimate. And the themes, universal. Betrayal, power, identity, belonging. The same forces that drove the Iliad forward now pulse inside this new myth. We watch Hieron struggle not just with monsters, but with questions of fate, of who he is, and whether that destiny was written before he was born. And in doing so, we remember that Greek mythology was never just about gods. It was about humans, trying to survive in a world ruled by forces they couldn't control. But why did Blood of Zeus strike such a chord? Why did a stylized, violent retelling of myth feel so familiar? Because it spoke to a generation raised on fragments. We live in a digital age, surrounded by chaos, stitched together by screens. The gods who were taught to believe in progress, reason, certainty seem less stable than ever. So we turn to older gods, ones who never promise peace, only meaning. Blood of Zeus doesn't give us answers. It gives us symbols. It doesn't preach. It reflects. It says, what if your anger is divine? What if your pain is part of something ancient? What if the battle you're fighting is a story told since time began? And yet, the show isn't without criticism. Some scholars bristle at the deviations, at the invented characters, the reshaped timelines, the liberties taken with myth. But mythology was never static. In ancient Athens, every storyteller changed the tale. Each poet added their own twist. That was the point. To keep the story alive, it had to breathe. What Blood of Zeus does isn't heresy. It's tradition. A new bard, a new voice, a new age. One of the most chilling moments in the series comes not from a battle, but from a whisper, a prophecy, a vision. A sense that this world, this divine drama is bigger than any one character. That's myth at its core. It's not just a plot. It's a worldview. A way of looking at reality where every pain, every love, every loss is part of something sacred, something cosmic, something worth remembering. And perhaps that's why Blood of Zeus matters more than its runtime or rating. It proved that we're still hungry for these stories, not just as entertainment, but as a ritual, a return to meaning in a fractured world. And maybe, just maybe, it showed us that mythology isn't locked in temples or tombs. It lives in the choices we make, in the stories we tell, in the way we keep coming back to the same ancient truths, dressed in new clothes. So the next time you open Netflix, and you scroll past the noise, and you see a familiar lightning bolt, pause and remember, you're not just watching a show. You're part of a myth that still speaks, still transforms, still waits for someone like you to hear it again. Chapter 3. Olympus. When gods became avatar, did we inherit their power or reduce it? Once upon a time, the gods demanded temples. Now they ask for skins, weapons, cosmetics, a battle pass. It sounds absurd, doesn't it? Zeus, king of the sky, unlocked after level 53. Hades, lord of the underworld, wielding a pickaxe in a cartoon battlefield. Poseidon, not in a storm, but in a loading screen. Yet here we are. Welcome to Fortnite Chapter 5, Season 2, the Season of Olympus. At first glance, this might seem like the end of myth, a reduction. The gods reduced to digital collectibles, dancing awkward emotes under neon skies. But something deeper is happening here, something worth paying attention to. Because when ancient deities return in the form of playable characters, we must ask, is this parody or prophecy? Fortnite, for all its chaos and color, is more than a game. It is a cultural platform, a space where millions gather not just to play, but to participate in a living, breathing, shared mythology. Think about it. Every player enters a world where rules are bent, powers are granted, and legends are born in real time. What is that, if not myth reborn? What is a player with wings, lightning, and divine armor, if not a modern demigod? The inclusion of Greek gods in Fortnite isn't just clever branding. It's a mirror, a reflection of how we still crave epic power. We still dream of ascent, of flight, of wielding thunder in a world that too often makes us feel small. By allowing players to become Zeus, even for a moment, Fortnite taps into something primal, the desire to be larger than life, to matter, to shape the world with force, the same desire that created the myths in the first place. But this modern Olympus is different. It's not carved in stone, it's coded in data. The gods don't descend from the heavens, they're dropped from the battle bus. They don't test mortals, they are mortals, controlled by them. And here's the twist. In this world, we are the gods now. That's a radical shift in the mythic hierarchy. In ancient Greece, mortals lived in fear of divine wrath. A missed offering, a proud boast, a wrong glance, all could bring ruin. Today, the roles have reversed. We select the gods, we customize them, we control their fate. It's gamification, and maybe it's a warning. Because what happens when sacred symbols become merchandise? When millennia-old stories are compressed into skins and emotes, do they lose meaning, or do they gain new meaning? That depends on how we see myth in the first place. If myth is just entertainment, then yes, this is trivial. But if myth is a living language, always evolving, always shifting, then this is simply its next phase. Consider this. In the past, myths were told around fires. Later, they were carved into marble, then printed on pages, adapted into films, streamed on devices, and now they're played, interacted with, remixed on. The form has changed, but the function remains: to inspire, to embody ideals, to ask, what if you were more than human? And Fortnite, in its strange, chaotic way, does that. It gives us symbols, not just of gods, but of choice. Choose Zeus, and you wield authority. Choose Hades, and you command shadows. Choose Artemis, and you master the hunt. These aren't just skins, they're digital masks for ancient archetypes. And the battlefield, it's not so different from the myths. A place where strength is tested, alliances shift, and fate is uncertain. But there's another layer here, one more. Philosophical. When we embody gods in a game, are we celebrating them, or replacing them? In ancient stories, humans sought favor from Olympus. Now Olympus seeks our attention, our clicks, our time. The divine is now content, and we, the mortals, are the new curators of myth. This may feel sacrilegious, and in some ways it is, but it's also deeply human, because we don't just worship gods, we recreate them, in our image, in our language, in our games, and that's not new, that's ancient. Even the Greeks reimagined older myths, borrowing from Babylon, Egypt, and beyond. They too adapted, borrowed, rebranded. So perhaps Fortnite's Olympus is not a betrayal, but a continuation, another step in the mythic evolution. Still, there's something eerie about seeing Ares dab, something surreal about watching Aphrodite build stairs with glowing wood. It reminds us of myth's vulnerability, of how easily the sacred becomes silly, how fast a door turns to irony, and yet, Maybe that's part of the story too. Even in ancient plays, the gods were mocked, laughed at, humanized, so perhaps this too is part of their survival. To endure, the divine must sometimes be ridiculous. But here's the real mystery. Why do we keep returning to these same names? Why Zeus? Why Hades? Why not invent new icons? Because deep down, we don't want new gods. We want the old ones, dressed for the times, because they already know us. They already hold our fears, our ambitions, our flaws, and we know them even without realizing it. So the next time you log into a game and see thunder crackle from your character's hands, ask yourself, is this just fantasy? Or is this modern myth? Are you just playing around, or stepping into an eternal pattern? You may not be a demigod, you may never visit Olympus, but somewhere between your screen and your soul, the gods still live, waiting, watching, and maybe, just maybe, whispering their old stories through your fingertips. Chapter 4. Fashioning the Divine. The gods once wore laurel and bronze. Today, they wear silk, gold, and logos. When you think of Greek mythology, you probably don't think of the runway, not of flashing cameras, not of silk, leather, or towering stilettos, but step into the world of high fashion, and you may be surprised by who you find staring back at you. A golden face, serpents for hair, eyes that do not blink, Medusa, front and center, on the chest of celebrities, athletes, and icons, not as a monster, but as a brand. Versailles. There she is, etched in gold, framed in circles, gazing out from perfume bottles, handbags, and couture gowns. Once cursed by Athena, once hunted by heroes, once feared by all. Now Medusa's power, luxury, status. The question is, how did she get here? How did a woman once condemned become the symbol of glamour? And more broadly, why are the gods of old now walking the catwalk? To answer that, we have to understand something ancient. In Greece, appearance was never separate from meaning. Armor wasn't just for battle, it was identity. Jewelry wasn't just adornment, it was protection, status, connection to the divine. Every thread, every texture, every color spoke mythology, lived not just in stories, but in style. So perhaps it's not surprising that in the modern world, the mythic would re-emerge not just in books or screens, but in clothing. Let's return to Medusa. Her transformation from cursed victim to fashion icon is no accident. Gianni Versace once said he chose her because whoever looks at her falls in love, and they can't escape her. In myth, Medusa's gaze turned men to stone. In fashion, her image stops you in your tracks, a kind of seductive power, intimidating, fierce, unapologetic. Isn't that what fashion sells? Not comfort, but command, not subtlety, but impact. Medusa, then, is perfect. She's beauty as danger, femininity as strength, a woman wronged, now reborn in gold. But Medusa is not alone. Greek mythology has made its way into countless collections, from Alexander McQueen's flowing gowns inspired by ancient drapery, to Dior's reinterpretations of togas, to Balmain's armor-like silhouettes echoing Achilles' bronze breast. Designers borrow more than shapes. They borrow themes, power, tragedy, immortality, the timeless allure of the gods. Why? Because fashion, at its heart, is aspirational. It asks, who do you want to be? And myth answers, a god, a goddess, a legend, a symbol. Fashion gives us mythic skins, woven in fabric instead of pixels. A gown isn't just cloth, it's narrative. It says, I am untouchable. A suit doesn't just fit, it transforms. It says, I am someone else now. Much like Athena putting on her helmet, or Hermes lacing his winged sandals, and it goes deeper. Because in myth, transformation is everything. Daphne becomes a tree. Narcissus becomes a flower. Zeus becomes anything he wants. Change is divine. And fashion, it's built on that same promise. You don't have to stay who you are. Dress differently, walk differently, be someone new. That's not just style, that's alchemy. Of course, not all uses of myth in fashion are profound. Sometimes it's surface decoration, trend, a flash of ancient gold on a sneaker tongue. But even then, something lingers. A symbol seen is a symbol felt. Even if we don't know the story, we feel the weight. A laurel wreath on a jacket, victory. A collar motif in a skirt, elegant structure, history. Even the Nike logo, a wing, drawn from the goddess of victory herself. We wear the gods, even when we forget their names. But not everyone forgets. In fact, some reclaim. Many modern designers, especially women, are revisiting myths to retell it. Not as male-dominated epics, but as stories of female power, pain, resistance. Medusa again leads this wave now as a symbol for survivors. Athena, as the patron of wisdom, becomes a muse for minimalist design. Persephone, both queen and captive, becomes a symbol for duality, light and dark, innocence and rebellion. These aren't just stories sewn into seams, they are statements. Fashion becomes myth-making again, not retelling the past but reshaping it. So what does it all mean? Why should it matter that the gods are in our closets? Because symbols are powerful. They outlive us. A dress worn today might vanish tomorrow, but the feeling it gave, the image it invoked, that lingers just like myth. In a world where attention is currency and image is identity, mythology finds new life through fashion. Not as worship, not as costume, but as presence, silent, symbolic, undeniable. So, the next time you pass a billboard, we'll see a logo you've seen 100 times. Look again, is that a brand? Or is that Athena's shield? Is that just design? Or is that the echo of Olympus, stitched in silk? Maybe we don't wear togas anymore. Maybe our temples or shopping malls, our rituals, but somewhere in the folds of fabric and the shimmer of gold, the gods are still dressing us, preparing us for our own heroic story. And maybe, just maybe, when we stand tall in something bold, something beautiful, something ancient in its essence, we aren't just wearing fashion, we are wearing myth. Chapter 5. Percy Jackson and the New Demigods. They weren't born in Athens. They were raised in New York, but the blood of Olympus flows through them all the same. There was a time when Greek gods spoke through marble oracles. Now, they text their children, and those children, they don't wear togas. They wear hood, sneakers, camp, half-blood t-shirts. They ride the subway. They fail math tests. They worry about crushes and monsters, sometimes in the same breath. This is the world of Percy Jackson. And for an entire generation, it's where Greek mythology began again. It started with a simple idea. What if the gods were still alive, still bickering, still falling in love, still watching humanity with distant, dangerous curiosity? But this time, what if they lived in America? What if Mount Olympus hovered invisibly above the Empire State Building? What if Poseidon had a son who hated high school? Enter Percy, a 12-year-old boy with dyslexia, ADHD, and a terrible habit of attracting mythical creatures. He doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know why he's always in trouble. But we, the readers, we sense it. He is a hero in the making, and that's the secret of Percy Jackson and the Olympians. It doesn't just retell mythology. It invites you in. It says, you don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be strong. You just need to survive long enough to figure out who you really are. Rick Riordan, the author behind the series, didn't write Percy as a legend. He wrote him as a kid, messy, funny, angry, afraid. And in doing so, he made myth accessible. The labyrinth became middle school. The Minotaur wore cargo shorts. And ambrosia, it tasted like chocolate chip cookies. It sounds silly, but it works. Because at its core, Greek mythology was always about people flawed, passionate, overwhelmed by powers beyond their control. So unlike growing up, exactly. But Percy Jackson is more than nostalgia. It's become a cultural touchstone, a way for modern readers, especially young ones, to meet the old gods on their own terms. Not as distant beings, but as parents, mentors, even enemies. Zeus is no longer just a lightning god. He's an absentee father. Poseidon isn't a sea god. He's a dad who never called. These are not just divine figures. They are metaphors for the messiness of life. Abandonment, belonging, power, responsibility, and perhaps most powerfully, identity. Because Percy doesn't just fight monsters. He fights to understand who he is. Is he just another troubled kid? Or is he the son of a god, destined for greatness? And isn't that the question we all ask in our quietest moments? Am I ordinary, or is there something more? That's why the books resonated. They weren't just fantasy, they were mirrors. And now, with the new Disney Plus series rebooting the saga, a fresh generation will walk that same path. They'll meet Annabeth, the brilliant daughter of Athena, Grover, the loyal satyr who fears but never flees, Chiron, the wise centaur who teaches through pain, and they'll step into Camp Half-Blood, a place where kids learn to fight monsters with swords and sarcasm, a place where difference is destiny. But here's what makes Percy Jackson different from many other modern myth adaptations. It doesn't glorify the gods. In fact, it often calls them out. They're flawed, petty, irresponsible. It's like in the original myths. Zeus causes wars, Hera plots revenge, Ares picks fights just to feel alive, and the demigods, they pay the price. That tension between the divine and the broken is what gives the series its soul, because Percy Jackson isn't about worship, it's about inheritance. What do we do with the power we didn't ask for? What do we do with the past we can't escape? These are mythic questions. And teenage ones. And that overlap between the ancient scale and adolescent emotion is what makes this saga so enduring. Of course, some may say it's all been simplified, watered down. Greek mythology, after all, is bloody, complex, deeply tragic. But Percy doesn't erase that. It just filters it. It brings the gods down to street level. Because if Olympus truly never fell, then it must be here in our cities, our schools, our struggles. Not just above us. There's a quiet beauty in how the series ends. Not with total victory, not with perfection, but with growth. Percy isn't just a hero. He's a kid learning to make peace with the chaos of his birthright. And isn't that what myth is about? Learning to live with the divine and the broken, both at once. So the next time you see a child reading Percy Jackson on a bus, at a library, under a blanket with a flashlight, know this: they're not just reading a book. They're entering a world older than time. A world where monsters wait behind lockers, and heroes hide behind sarcasm, and every broken kid might just be a demigod in disguise. Because mythology never dies. It simply finds new blood. Chapter 6, Madeline Miller and the Feminist Retellings. What happens when we let the silence speak, when we return to myth and listen differently? For thousands of years, Greek mythology was a world of men. Gods with thunderbolts, warriors with spears, kings with oaths, poets who decided which voices lived, and which ones were left in the margins. And in those margins, women, witches, lovers, victims, villains, they were used to move the story forward or to suffer, so the hero could shine brighter. But what if we turned back? What if we paused at the edges of those ancient stories and listened? That's what Madeline Miller does. Not as a classicist chasing footnotes, but as a storyteller chasing truth that was buried in silence. Her novels, The Song of Achilles and Circe, aren't just retellings. They are acts of reclamation. They take myths we thought we knew and unravel them thread by thread until something astonishing is revealed. Let's start with Circe. In Homer's Odyssey, she is a footnote, a witch, an obstacle, the one who turns men into pigs. But in Miller's hands, Circe becomes more than that. She becomes a voice, a daughter of Helios, born into a world that sees her as too weak, too strange, too human, banished, isolated, feared, and yet she endures. She learns not just magic but selfhood. Circe's island Aea becomes a symbol of transformation, not just of beasts into animals, but of a woman discovering her own power on her own terms. There are gods in this book, yes, and monsters, and heroes, but the deepest conflict, it isn't war, it's identity. It's asking, who am I when no one names me, right? Who am I when I am not someone's daughter, or enemy, or temptation? Just me. What makes Circe so powerful isn't just what it adds, it's what it refuses to forget. It lingers in grief. It listens to pain. It allows myth to hold still, not as spectacle, but as space. A space for healing, a space for choice. And in doing so, Miller reclaims not just Circe, but the thousands of women like her. The honor, the misunderstood, the rewritten. Then there's the Song of Achilles, a love story hidden in the blood and fire of the Trojan War. You won't find it in Homer's version, but the thread was always there in the closeness of Achilles and Patroclus, in the way Achilles mourned only him, in the rage that followed that death. Madeline Miller pulls that thread, gently, lovingly, until it becomes a tapestry all its own. In her telling, Achilles is no longer a symbol of rage. He is a boy, then a man, then a god, undone by grief. And Patroclus, so often forgotten, becomes the heart of the story. Not the strongest, not the bold, but the truest. This is what Miller does best. She finds the soft places in myth, the quiet moments, the overlooked glances, the pain no one spoke aloud, and she brings them to the front. Suddenly, the epic is intimate. The legend is fragile. The war is no longer glorious, it's human. These aren't modernizations. They are corrections. They remind us that myth was never perfect. It was always political, always male, always told by the victors. So when women, queer voices, or marginalized storytellers retell these myths, it's not revisionism. It's resurrection. And readers have responded. Circe spent over a year on the New York Times bestseller list. The Song of Achilles exploded on TikTok years after it was first published. Not because the books were trendy, but because they touched something missing. We crave these retellings, not just for novelty, but for truth. because deep down we know the old stories were incomplete. We know Medusa wasn't just a monster, that Cassandra wasn't just crazy, that Helen wasn't just a prize. They were people, trapped in narratives not of their own making, and now they are finally speaking. So what does this mean for mythology today? It means the canon is not closed, it never was. It means myth is a conversation, not a decree. And every time someone writes from the shadows of a famous tale, they expand it, they deepen it, they make it breathe. And if that makes you uncomfortable, that's okay. Myth was never meant to be safe. It was meant to unsettle, to provoke, to shift, to make us ask, what have we ignored? Who have we forgotten? What voices are still waiting to be heard? So when you pick up Circe or the Song of Achilles, you are not reading, you are standing at the edge of something old and letting it bloom again. You are honoring not just the gods, but the silence between their thunder. And maybe, just maybe, you are becoming part of the myth yourself. Not as a hero with a sword, but as a listener, a witness, a keeper of forgotten flame. Chapter 7, the eternal archetypes. Myths and archetypes do not. They shift, they wear new faces, but they never truly die. Close your eyes. Picture a hero. Not any hero, the hero. What do you see? A sword, a scar, a secret past. Now picture a trickster. Clever smile, fast hands, chaos in their wake. Then a wise woman, eyes that see too far, words that weigh like prophecy. If these images came to you as you're not imagining or remembering, not from memory but from myth. We are not born knowing these characters, but somehow they live in us. The archetypes, patterns older than language, shapes the soul seems to recognize without ever being taught. The Greeks didn't invent them, but they gave them names: Zeus, Hera, Hermes, Artemis, Achilles, Odysseus, a symbol, an essence. And while their stories may have crumbled with their temples, their forms remain reborn again and again. In today's stories, we still meet them on screen, in books, in games, in the quiet moments when a character walks on and we know who they are before they speak a word. Let's begin with the most primal, the hero. Brave, flawed, unwilling at first, called to something greater. This is Heracles, burdened with labors. This is Perseus, facing monsters with nothing but a mirror and nerve. Today he's everywhere. Harry Potter, Katniss Everdeen, Frodo, Luke Skywalker. The hero doesn't always want the journey, but the world won't let him or her stay behind. The mentor, wise, mysterious, sometimes a little cruel. They guide, they vanish. They leave you changed. Chiron, the wounded healer. Athena, whispering in minds. Prometheus, punished for giving knowledge. Today, Morpheus, Gandalf, Yoda. They never save the day themselves, but they shape the one who does. The trickster, unpredictable, funny, dangerous. They append order, not to destroy it but to expose what was false. In myth, we meet Hermes, crossing borders, lying with ease, stealing with style. He is laughter in sacred spaces. In the modern world, Loki, Jack Sparrow, the Joker, Deadpool. The trickster shows us our hypocrisy. He is chaos as truth. The mother, she gives, she shelters, but she can also destroy. Demeter, searching the underworld for her daughter. Gaia, birthing gods and monsters alike. Today, Sarah Connor, Molly Weasley. Queen Ramonda, the mother, is not always gentle. She is fierce love in its most ancient form. The lover, longing, beauty, tragedy. Think of Helen, a face that launched 1,000 ships. Think of Orpheus and Eurydice, bound across death itself. In modern tales, Jack and Rose, Romeo and Juliet, Hazel and Augustus. Love here is destiny and often doom, because the lover, in myth, is never just romantic. It is transformative, even if it ends in ruin. These archetypes are not. They are foundations. They are the bones beneath every story you love. And Greek mythology carved them deep into our collective imagination. But why do we keep returning to them? Why not invent new molds? Because these forms are human. They speak to what we fear, what we desire, what we believe we might become. They are not characters, they are mirrors. Take the wounded hero Achilles, with his invincible body, and one fatal flaw. Every story since has carried that echo. The unbeatable, broken, the strong, scarred, because deep down we don't want perfection. We want recognition. We understand those. Or the rebel queen, Antigone, defying kings for the sake of love. Medea, burning with rage at betrayal. Today, we see her in Daenerys Targaryen, Lisbeth Salander, women who wield power, who are told they're too much, who write their own stories, no matter the cost. These aren't just tropes, they're rituals. And when we watch them unfold on screen or on page, we aren't just entertained, we're participating, because mythology never asked us to believe in literal gods. It asked us to recognize ourselves inside them. So when we see a reluctant hero rise, or a wise guide fall, or a love that defies time, we feel something ancient stir. Not nostalgia but memory. The story of Greek mythology isn't over, because the forms it gave us are still speaking, still shifting, still walking beside us in every film, every novel, every moment of wonder and fear. They are the grammar of dreams, the language of longing, the code beneath the plot, and like DNA they replicate, silently, powerfully, endlessly. So the next time you fall in love with a story, ask yourself, is it new, or is it just wearing a different face? A face once carved in stone, now cast in pixels or paper or poetry. The gods may have vanished, but the shapes they left behind, they live in us, and we live through them, again and again and again. Chapter 8, Myth and Music. From Orpheus to Beyoncé, the first stories were sung. And somewhere, they still are. Long before books, before scrolls, before marble statues or golden amphorae, there was music, lyres, rhythms echoing through the caves, the temples, the shores of forgotten islands. Greek mythology didn't begin as literature. It began as song, and no figure embodies that beginning more than Orpheus, the son of a muse, a poet, a musician, a magician of sound. They said his music could calm storms, charm beasts, make trees lean closer just to listen. And when his beloved Eurydice died, he sang his way into the underworld, not with a sword, but with a song. Even Hades, lord of silence, of finality, paused, because Orpheus reminded the gods that music is not mortal, it's divine. But he looked back. He broke the one rule, and she was lost. Again, forever. The myth of Orpheus is not just a tragedy, it is a truth. That music holds power, but never control. That it can move gods, but not fate. And yet, we've never stopped trying. Music has always carried myth, echoed it, remixed it, revealed it. Even today, when we listen closely, we still hear Olympus humming beneath the bass. Let's start in the world of opera. For centuries, composers like Monteverdi and Gluck reimagined Orpheus' Medea. Their sorrows filled marble halls. Their voices soared beyond comprehension. Then came musicals. Broadway Hadestown retold the Orpheus myth in jazz, blues, and Appalachian grit, transforming the underworld into a Depression-era factory. Wait for me, Orpheus sings. And Eurydice answers, I gave it all to you. It's still the same story, but now it dances, it pulses, it aches in a different key. And in the world of pop music, the gods are everywhere. You just have to know how to look. Take Beyoncé. In her visual album Lemonade, she channels not just personal heartbreak, but mythic rage, rebirth, and resurrection. Dressed in gold, adorned like a goddess, walking through fire, drowning, rising again. She becomes Ocean from Yoruba myth, but she also echoes Demeter, Herapes, queens who suffered, who burned, who demanded justice. Lemonade isn't just an album, it's a myth cycle, told in rhythm, color, and movement. Then there's Florence plus the machine, a voice that howls like lyrics full of rivers, rebirth, and sacrificial flame. In songs like What the Water Gave Me and King, Florence Welch sings of transformation, longing, loss. The same chords that ran through Narcissus echo Daphne. It's no coincidence. Florence once described her creative process as halfway between witchcraft and therapy. Sound familiar? That's what myth always was. Even Hosier, in Talks, sings of Aphrodite's power to destroy and intoxicate. Even Taylor Swift, with her Folklore and Evermore albums, invokes female archetypes lost in time. Women misunderstood, cursed, rewritten, modern muses, tragic heroines, and in hip-hop the gods speak to in the swagger of Zeus, in the vengeance of Nemesis, in lyrics that rewrite fate, rise from ashes, conquer death. Because rap at its core is epic poetry, battles, lineage, legacy, told not with lyres, but with 8/8. Why does myth fit so well into music? Because music is emotion without permission. It doesn't ask you to understand, it asks you to feel. And myths, Greek or otherwise, have always lived in feeling, rage, grief, love that bends the cosmos. Their melody, even in film scores, the mythic lingers when you hear the booming brass of a superhero theme. the swelling violins of a sacrificial moment. You're not just watching fiction, you're watching ritual, because music makes myth feel real again. Not dusty, not distant, alive. So next time you feel chills when a chorus or tears fall for a voice you don't fully understand, ask yourself, is this just a song? Or is it Orpheus again trying, once more, to bring love back from the dark? Because even now, in earbuds, in stadiums, in whispered playlists at 2 a.m., the myths are still singing. And maybe, just maybe, we're singing with them. Chapter 9, Myth in Movies. Olympus on the big screen. They once walked marble temples. Now they stride across green screens. The gods have always loved spectacle. Thunder, transformation, wings that tear the sky. Heroes bathed in golden light. So maybe it was inevitable that they'd find a second life on the big screen. Cinema and myth were made for each other. Both larger than life, both powered by belief. You sit in the dark, you wait, and then the story begins. But Greek mythology in movies hasn't always been reverent. Sometimes it's grand, other times grotesque, occasionally ridiculous, yet still we keep watching, because there's something magnetic about seeing the divine made visible. We want to see Zeus hurl lightning, we want to see Pegasus fly, we want to see the stories we once only imagined. Clash of the Titans, one of the earliest mainstream myth epics. Perseus, Medusa, in the original stop motion, gave life to monsters, every movement slow, eerie, otherworldly. In the remake, CGI made the world explode with chaos, but the heart, still ancient, immortal, challenging fate. A hero sculpted by divine indifference. Troy, no monsters, no gods, just men. Achilles, played by Brad Pitt, not as a demigod, but as a man chasing glory, fearing obscurity. The film stripped the divine to show the brutality of legend. And in doing so, it asked, were the gods ever real, or were they just reflections of our ambition? Wonder Woman. Now we shift to a woman born of clay, shaped by Zeus, trained on an island of warriors. Diana is not just a superhero. She is a myth reborn, a daughter of war, bringing peace. Her journey echoes Athena, Artemis, Persephone. It's Greek mythology cloaked in DC Comics, but the mythic bones are unmistakable. Immortals, stylized, violent, dreamlike. A film where gods descend like lightning bolts, and titans scream behind golden bars. It may not be historically accurate, but myth never was. What it does do is capture that raw power, the sense that gods live just above our heads, waiting, watching, judging. It's not realism, it's ritual in motion. Hercules, Percy Jackson, oh brother, where art? Sometimes, mythology sneaks inside. Disney's Hercules turns labors into sin. Percy Jackson brings Olympus to New York. Oh brother, where art thou? A Coen brothers film retells the Odyssey through American folk music in the Dust Bowl South, without the marble. And yet, the bones remain. Because the best myth-based films don't retell. They translate. They ask, what is this God, this trial, this fate, trying to tell us now? Not just what it meant then. But for all its spectacle, cinema struggles with one thing. Myth was never tidy. Heroes failed. Gods contradicted themselves. Endings were unclear. But film, especially blockbuster film, often demands resolution. And that can flatten myth. Turn Dionysus into a plot device. Reduce Athena to exposition. Make the gods feel predictable. Still, even in those imperfections, something survives. Because we're not just watching stories. We're invoking them. The theater is the new temple. The screen, a shimmering veil. The audience, the congregation. We sit, we believe, we emerge changed. And when the credits roll, we remember. Not the exact plot, not the CGI, but the feeling. That for a moment, the world almost made sense. Or at least it felt bigger. That's the secret cinema shares with myth. They both elevate us, not away from pain, but through it. They give shape to the questions that haunt us. Why are we here? What is greatness? What does it mean to be remembered? Because in the end, the gods always return to the screen, not because we need entertainment, but because we need symbols. So next time you see a lightning bolt crack across a movie sky, or a woman with a bow confront an ancient curse, don't just watch, listen. The myths are still speaking. And maybe, just maybe, the gods are watching, too, from behind the curtain of silver light, waiting for their next close-up. Chapter 10, Myths in Video Games, Choices, Trials, and Digital. Once, the gods spoke through oracles. Now, they speak through controllers. Imagine standing at the gates of Hades, not as a spectator, but as someone holding the blade, making the choice. Do you go forward? Do you look back? In mythology, we listened to stories. In gaming, we live them. We don't just watch Achilles fight, we become him. We don't just hear about Zeus escaping the underworld. We guide him room by room, death after death. In this digital age, mythology hasn't vanished. It's Hades Supergiant Games, one of the most beloved myth-inspired games in recent years. You play as Zeus, the son of Hades, attempting to escape the underworld. Each escape attempt is a journey of growth, of trial, of choice, and along the way, you meet the Olympians, not as distant gods, but as chatty, opinionated relatives texting you blessings. Mid-fight, Aphrodite flirts, Dionysus jokes. Athena offers wisdom in the form of defense upgrades. They are modern, relatable, yet unmistakably mythic. But beneath the mechanics, there's something deeper. A story about family, about rebellion, about legacy. Zeus isn't just fighting monsters. He's trying to uncover the truth of his birth, to understand why his mother left, to make peace with a father who never showed warmth. And in that struggle, he becomes more than a game character. He becomes an echo of Orestes, Telemachus, even Prometheus, a child of power, trapped by the past, forging his own fate. God of War Santa Monica Studio. Kratos began as a rage-fueled warrior, a one-man apocalypse, but in the modern reboot, he is older, quieter, a father. He's left the Greek pantheon but carries it like a scar. In God of War, we see him struggle with guilt, with violence, with how to teach his son, Atreus, to be more than what he was. And in Ragnarok, the past returns not just as Norse threats, but as Greek ghosts. This isn't just myth for entertainment. It's myth as therapy. The player doesn't just fight, they reckon. Assassin's Creed Odyssey, a world where history and myth blur, set during the Peloponnesian War. You explore ancient Greece as a mercenary, but it's not just battles and politics. You stumble upon Medusa in the forest. You descend into the labyrinth to face them, and you climb Mount Olympus, not for glory, but for truth. The gods don't appear often, but their presence is felt in the architecture, in the fear, in the stories whispered by villagers. Myth here is not center stage. It's woven into the land. Other mentions Immortals Phoenix Rising, a whimsical retelling of myth where gods are flawed, sarcastic, and deeply insecure. Smite, a battle arena where gods from every pantheon fight side by side, or against each other. Fortnite, yes, even here, skins inspired by Kratos, Medusa, Zeus, myth. So why do games and Greek myth work so well together? Because mythology has always been interactive. It wasn't meant to be passively consumed, it was told aloud, rewritten each time, changed to suit the listener, the occasion, the need. And video games at their best do the same. They give you the soul, but they don't tell you how to use it. They give you the labyrinth, but the path is yours to choose. They give you the gods, but whether you follow or defy them, that's up to you. And more than any other medium, games let you fail. Not once, but again and again, like Sisyphus, like Icarus, like Odysseus. Shipwrecked and stubborn, failure becomes a part of the journey, a part of the myth. Games also offer something ancient myths hinted at but rarely allowed: redemption. In Hades, Zeus fails, but grows. In God of War, Kratos kills, but tries to heal. These are not just arcs. They are modern mythologies, forged by players, personnel, evolving, endlessly. When you duel, when you explore, when you build alliances, you're reenacting something as old as time, trial, quest, transformation. That's the heart of every myth, and every game worth remembering. So next time you pick up a controller, and the music swells, and a voice speaks from a glowing portal, and a path opens toward the unknown, know this: you are not just playing, you are stepping into myth. Maybe not the one Homer sang, but one just as sacred, because this time, you are the hero. Chapter 11: Why we still need the myths. They weren't just stories, they were survival. Thousands of years ago, before science, psychology, or streaming services, people gathered in the dark. They looked at stars and storms. They heard thunder and birth cries and silence after death. And they asked, why? Why do we suffer? Why do we love? Why do we lose? And in the space where answers didn't come, they told stories, not to solve the mystery, but to survive it. Greek mythology wasn't just religion. It was humanity, trying to understand itself. Why does the sea rise with anger? Poseidon. Why do crops die in winter? Because gods live inside us. And when we fail, we blame fate. We blame Zeus. It hurt less than blaming ourselves. But here's the truth. we're not so different now. We still chase patterns, still wrestle with guilt, love, rage, longing. The myths didn't end. They just changed costumes. Today, we call them films, novels, songs, games, but the need is the same. We want to believe there's meaning behind the chaos, that our pain isn't pointless, that somewhere, in another time or plane, someone has felt this too. Someone divine. And so we reach back, not because we're nostalgic, but because myth gives shape to feelings too big to name. When grief comes, and no words feel right, we remember Orpheus. When betrayal cracks the heart, we remember when hope seems foolish, we remember Prometheus bound, still burning. These stories are anchors. They tether us to something larger than today's noise. They remind us, you are not the first to break, and you won't be the last to heal. We live in a time of facts, algorithms, precision, but myth, it whispers, it doesn't explain, it holds. And sometimes, that's what we need most. Not data, but depth. And there's another reason we need myth, because it teaches us how to hold contradiction. Achilles was both tender and violent. Athena wise and vengeful, Odysseus loyal and deceitful. They were messy, and that's freeing, because it means we can be two. We can fail and still be worth something. We can hurt and still be heroic. Modern culture often demands clarity. Be one thing. Know your path. Pick a side. But myth says, you are allowed to be a paradox. You are allowed to be becoming. We also need myth to teach us responsibility. The Greeks feared hubris, the sin of thinking yourself godlike. They knew what happened when humans tried to control fate. Fall came quickly. Tragedy followed. Today, we build things faster than ever, create technologies that shape the planet, but without myth, without humility. What guides us? Who reminds us that power must be tempered by wisdom? And finally, we need myth because it connects us to others, across borders, across centuries. When we read about Theseus or Icarus or Antigone, we're not just reading, we're joining a long line of voices, mothers, sailors, poets, soldiers, dreamers, all asking the same questions, all holding the same pain. In a fractured world, myth says, you are not alone, you are never alone. Your story, however strange, however shattered, fits within something vast, something sacred. So when we see a child dress as Medusa, when we hear a pop song echo Eurydice's longing, when we feel something stir watching a god rise in a film, that's not coincidence. That's memory, not of this life but of humanity itself. The myths live, not because we force them to, but because they've taken root in our language, in our fears, in our dreams. They do not need temples, they have us. Chapter 12, the new myths. We are writing, the old stories still echo. But listen closely, something new is singing. We began with gods on mountaintops, with titans in chains, with heroes chasing glory across oceans. We passed through pages, songs, screens, and pixels. And now, we stand somewhere new. Not in Olympus, not in Hades, but in ourselves. Because the myths are no longer just what we inherit. They are what we create. Every generation rewrites the world in its own image. And myth, true myth, adapts. It doesn't die. It transforms. So what are the myths we are writing now? They don't always wear togas. They don't always wield thunder. But look closer. A girl with glowing eyes who stands against a corrupt empire. A boy from nowhere who saves galaxies with love and luck. A child who survives a storm again and again, and chooses kindness over revenge. These are not just characters. They are symbols. They carry the same bones as Heracles, the same fire as Prometheus, the same heartbreak as Orpheus. We live in an age of crisis and connection. We scroll through floods and fires. We build artificial minds. We send robots to Mars and record our loneliness in 15-second bursts. And in all of it, we are reaching for meaning. Still, what happens when gods are no longer in the sky, but in the cloud? When we don't pray at altars, but whisper wishes to algorithms? Who watches us now? Who judges? Who forgives? These are questions the Greeks would have understood, because they asked them too, just in different words. And now, we answer with new myths. Myths of climate, of code, of courage not built on conquest but on compassion. We imagine worlds where death is reversible, where time loops, where heroes fail again and again, and still get back up. We tell stories of survivors, outcasts, rebels, healers. These are our myths, and in some ways, they're wiser than the old ones, more human, less divine, but no less sacred, because they reflect not who we worship but who we are becoming. So don't be surprised when you see Medusa painted as misunderstood, when you hear Achilles in the voice of a queer boy in a song, when you find Persephone walking through a subway tunnel at night, alone but unafraid. These are not distortions, they are continuations. The myths are evolving, and so are we. And maybe that's the real point, not to preserve the old stories in amber, but to carry their fire forward, to let them guide us, question us, challenge us as we write our own. Because somewhere in a bedroom, a child is drawing a superhero with wings made of glass. Somewhere in a game, a player faces a beast with no name and chooses mercy. Somewhere in a notebook, a line is being written that will echo for centuries. These are beginnings. These are myths in motion. And long after we're gone, long after Olympus crumbles again into metaphor, someone will still be telling stories, by firelight, or through a screen, or inside a dream made of code and starlight. And in those stories, there will still be echoes of Zeus, of Hera, of Artemis, of you. Because myth doesn't belong to the past, it belongs to us, to the human heart, to the longing to understand, to remember, to imagine. So if you've ever loved a story so much it hurt, if you've ever cried at a hero's fall, or whispered to the sky for a sign, know this: you're not just watching myth, you're keeping it alive. And maybe you're already writing one of your own. Fall asleep now, if you must. But the stories will still be here waiting. If this journey stirred something ancient in you, consider subscribing. We tell stories that echo across time, and we'd love to have you along for the next myth. What modern myth have you seen recently? Leave it in the comments below.